It was a bitterly cold winter morning, with frost biting through even the thickest layers of clothing. The road lay deserted, shrouded in fog and silence that weighed heavily on the snow-covered ground. John Miller, a lonely trucker, was steering his red Peterbilt through this surreal scene when he noticed a faint silhouette by the roadside. At first, he thought it was trash, like the kind he often saw on the side of the road. Old bags, broken furniture, or sometimes a dead animal. But as his truck drew closer, the headlights revealed the true image. A shivering dog, her golden fur matted with frost and dirt, curled up in the snow. Beside her were four tiny, trembling puppies, barely alive. John gripped the steering wheel tighter. He was on a tight schedule, and his trucking company wasn't interested in excuses. But just as he was about to drive on, he heard the words of his late wife, Catherine, in his head. Sometimes angels appear in the most unexpected places. A curse escaped his lips as he hit the brakes. The truck hissed to a stop. John shifted into neutral, grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment, and yanked the door open. The cold hit him like a wall. Snow crunched under his boots as he approached the roadside. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. "Hello," he called out, his voice swallowed by the silence. The dog weakly lifted her head, her deep brown eyes meeting his. Fear, exhaustion, and something else, hope, were reflected in them. John knelt down, his knees sinking into the snow. "It's okay, girl," he murmured, reaching out a hand. She didn't move. Her breathing was shallow, her body trembling. The puppies huddled close to her, one of them letting out a faint whimper. He knew they wouldn't survive out here. "Damn it," he muttered. What was he supposed to do? He couldn't take strays into his cab, but if he left them, he'd never forget their faces for the rest of his life. He took a deep breath. "All right, girl," he said finally, pulling off his thick coat. Carefully, he lifted the tiny puppies and placed them in the warm bundle of his coat. The mother let out a weak sound. "I know, girl," he said gently. "I won't leave you." When he finally turned to her, there was a moment of silence between them. "Please," he whispered, as if she could understand. With great effort, she struggled to her feet, wobbly but determined, and followed him to the truck. John opened the passenger door, placing the puppies on the seat first, then lifting the mother. She was lighter than he expected, far too thin. Inside, she immediately curled around her puppies, her trembling slowly subsiding in the warm air. John climbed back into the driver's seat and started the engine. He glanced over at the dog. "You need a name," he murmured, thinking for a moment. Then he smiled faintly. "Lucy. I'll call you Lucy." The truck rolled forward again, through the thickening fog. John was late, no longer on schedule, but for the first time in years, he didn't care. "Sometimes angels appear in the most unexpected places," he whispered as the road ahead disappeared into the distance. The road led him onward, through the endless expanse of winter nowhere. Frost clung heavily to the branches of the trees lining the highway. John's thoughts raced as he stared through the windshield into the white-gray morning. He had no idea what he was going to do with Lucy and her puppies. The gas station where he usually stopped was still half an hour away. Maybe Sarah, who worked there, would have an idea. Lucy lay quieter now on the passenger seat, her eyes half closed. But every time the truck hit a bump, her ears twitched. She was exhausted but alert. John shook his head. "What am I even doing here?" he muttered to himself. When the familiar gas station finally emerged from the fog, he steered his truck slowly into the parking lot. The engine groaned as he shut it off. A sharp knock on his window made him look up. Sarah Parker stood there, bundled in her green coat, her eyes full of surprise. "John Miller, what have you got there?" she asked. He sighed and opened the door. "You wouldn't believe me even if I told you." The gas pump squeaked softly as John filled up his truck. The icy wind cut through his jacket as he watched Sarah carefully examining Lucy and the puppies. Her brow was furrowed with concern as she gently stroked the matted fur of the mother dog. "Where did you find her?" she asked quietly, looking up at John. "On the side of I-95. They wouldn't have survived the night," he said, his voice rough even to his own ears. He knew Sarah loved dogs, but this was more than just a stray story. Something about Lucy's condition made him uneasy. Sarah straightened up, wrapping one of the puppies in a blanket and holding it gently. She's starved, and her puppies are far too weak for the cold. We need to get them warm right away. John nodded and helped to bring the dogs inside the small gas station. Inside it was warm, the smell of old coffee and motor oil hanging in the air. Mike Brown, the station's mechanic, sat at the counter and frowned as he noticed the scene. "What have you dragged in, Miller?" he asked, standing up. Sarah answered for him. "A dog and her puppies, abandoned and half frozen. We need to warm them up." Mike took a closer look at the animals and snorted. "People who do that kind of thing should be locked up." John agreed, but as they carefully laid the puppies in a blanket and Sarah poured John a cup of warm tea, his gut feeling grew worse. Something wasn't right. The dog was well-groomed enough to have belonged to someone. The collar around her neck was old, but it bore a faded emblem. Sarah noticed it too. She leaned forward, brushed it aside, and frowned. "That's a logo. Wait a minute." She pulled out her phone and took a picture. "I know someone who might be able to identify this." Before John could ask who she meant, the low rumble of a motor broke the silence. His gaze instinctively turned to the window. A black car was parked on the road, its tinted windows revealing nothing. It sat for a moment, as if the driver was watching, then suddenly accelerated and disappeared into the fog. Mike stepped beside John. "Did you see that?" "Yeah," John said, feeling the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "And that's not the first time." Sarah looked between them. "What do you mean?" John exhaled slowly. "I saw a car like that yesterday, on the road right after I found Lucy, and now it shows up here. That's no coincidence." Mike clenched his fists. "You think someone dumped those dogs on purpose?" Sarah's face was pale. "I don't think this is a coincidence. I'll call my contacts. Maybe we can find out more." As the others talked, John's gaze returned to Lucy and her puppies. They were warm and safe, but for how long? He had a feeling this was only the beginning. He sighed and took a sip of the hot tea Sarah had handed him. The warmth spread slowly through his body, but his thoughts remained cool and sharp. He had no idea what he'd gotten himself into, but his instincts told him he'd need answers soon. Sarah dialed a number on her phone. "Janet, I need your help." "Yes, it's about a golden retriever with an old collar. There's a logo on it. I'll send you a picture. Can you find out where it's from?" She sent the image and then looked back at John. "Janet works for a rescue organization. If anyone knows whether these dogs came from a specific breeder, it's her." John nodded, but his thoughts were still on the black car. If these dogs had been dumped, it wasn't random. "I bet there's more to this," he said. Mike crossed his arms. "You think someone's trying to stop us from finding out more?" "I don't know," John admitted, "but I'm going to find out." John Miller sat in the gas station, staring out the window into the dense fog. The encounter with the black car had left him uneasy. Lucy lay curled up in a blanket, her puppies pressed close to her. Mike stood by the door, arms crossed, while Sarah nervously held her phone. The silence in the room was almost tangible. Suddenly, Sarah's phone vibrated. She answered it. "Janet, did you find anything?" She listened for a moment, then her face grew serious. "Are you sure?" "Damn, okay, I'll tell them." She hung up and turned to John. "The logo on Lucy's collar belongs to a place called Golden Paws Labs. Supposedly, it's a research center for animal medicine. But Janet says there are rumors they've been conducting genetic experiments on dogs. The authorities never found proof, but a few months ago, part of the lab was shut down, and some of their dogs went missing." John's stomach tightened. "You're saying Lucy was bred there?" Sarah nodded slowly. "It looks that way. And if that's the case, they probably wanted to get rid of her, because she wasn't useful for their experiments." Mike cursed under his breath. "So they just threw her and her puppies out in the cold to solve the problem?" "Those bastards." John clenched his fists. "That black car that was watching us? I bet it belongs to them. They wanted to make sure no one asked questions." Sarah looked out the window. "And now they know you're asking questions." The group fell silent for a moment. Then Mike slapped the counter. "All right, what now?" John took a deep breath. "I want to see where I found her. Maybe there are more clues." "Mike, you're with me. Sarah, you stay here and watch Lucy and the puppies." Sarah nodded. "Be careful." Outside, the cold had grown even sharper. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, as if another snowstorm was brewing. John and Mike drove the truck to the desolate spot by the roadside. The snow had obscured most traces, but John remembered exactly where Lucy had been lying. They got out, their boots crunching on the frozen ground. Mike stepped closer to a snowdrift. "This must be it." John shone his flashlight over the ground. Suddenly, something metallic glinted beneath a thin layer of snow. He knelt down and pulled it out, a small rectangular tag, heavily worn. Mike leaned in. "What does it say?" John wiped the dirt away and frowned. "Property of Golden Paws Labs." He looked up at Mike. "This is proof Lucy came from there." Mike snorted. "And that's probably why that black car was watching us. They don't want anyone finding out what they've done." John nodded slowly. "Then we'd better make sure someone does." He pocketed the tag and let his gaze sweep over the deserted roadside again. "Maybe there's more here," he murmured, starting to push the snow aside with his boot. Mike helped him, and after a few minutes, they found another object, a torn folder half buried in the snow. John picked it up, knocked off the snow, and opened it carefully. The pages were damp and torn at the edges, but some of the writing was still legible. It was a medical report, research notes. The handwriting was hurried and hard to decipher, but one name jumped out at him immediately. Project Aurora. "What the hell is this?" Mike muttered, looking over John's shoulder. "No idea," John admitted, "but it looks important. Maybe this is our key to finding out what Golden Paws is really up to." Mike rubbed his hands together to warm them. "Then we'd better get this to someone who can make sense of it." John nodded and carefully folded the folder. "We'll take it to the police. This might be bigger than we thought." Just as they were heading back to the truck, they heard the low rumble of an engine again. They froze. Slowly, John turned his head and saw the black car rolling along the road, then coming to a stop. The dark windows reflected only the pale light of the morning. "Damn it," Mike whispered. "They found us." John's pulse raced as he saw the black car parked by the roadside. The engine idled quietly, as if the driver was waiting for them. Mike cursed under his breath and grabbed a wrench from the toolbox on the truck's bed. "We shouldn't stay out here," Mike said in a low voice. "This doesn't look good." John nodded and opened the driver's door of his truck. "Get in. We're getting out of here." Just as they climbed into the truck, the black car started moving, not toward them, but parallel to the road, slowly, as if watching them. John gripped the steering wheel tighter and hit the gas. The truck roared to life, snow spraying from the tires as they sped back toward town. "That was damn creepy," Mike muttered, looking over his shoulder. The black car was still tailing them, keeping its distance. "They're not letting us go." John nodded silently. "We're going straight to the police. This is getting too dangerous." The road stretched endlessly through the snowy landscape as the truck raced forward. John could feel the tension in his fingertips. The black car was still behind them, not too close but always in sight. Finally, the lights of the town appeared ahead. John abruptly turned onto a side street and headed for the police station. As they pulled up in front of the building, Detective Roberts came out to meet them. "Miller Brown, what the hell's going on?" the detective asked as they jumped out of the truck. "We've got evidence that Lucy came from a lab called Golden Paws Labs," John explained quickly, "and we're being followed." Roberts frowned and looked in the direction they'd come from. The black car was nowhere to be seen. "Come inside, Nup," he said, leading them into the building. Inside it was warm, but John couldn't shake the tension in his chest. He laid the tag and the torn folder on the table. "This proves Lucy came from there," he said. "And these papers, they mentioned something called Project Aurora. I have no idea what it means, but it sounds important." Robert sat down and flipped through the crumpled pages. "Project Aurora. I've heard of it. A few months ago, there were rumors about illegal experiments, but no one could prove anything. Until now." He leaned forward. "What exactly were they doing there?" John's heart skipped a beat. They weren't just being followed, they were being actively hunted. He looked up at Roberts. "What can we do?" The detective leaned back. "I'll secure the files officially and get a search warrant for Golden Paws." Roberts sighed. Officially, Golden Paws Labs was a research institute for genetic therapies in animals, but we suspect they were actually breeding dogs with specific traits, stronger, smarter animals that could be used for certain purposes. Military, maybe even illegal fighting. If a dog didn't meet their standards, it was disposed of. Mike's jaw tightened. So they just threw Lucy and her puppies away? Roberts nodded slowly. That's what it looks like. Suddenly, John's phone vibrated. A message from Sarah. Someone was here asking about you. I think you should be careful. John's heart skipped a beat. They weren't just being followed, they were being actively hunted. He looked up at Roberts. What can we do? The detective leaned back. I'll secure the files officially and get a search warrant for Golden Paws Labs. But that'll take time. Until then, you should be careful. Mike snorted. And if they show up again? Roberts looked at him seriously. Then call me immediately. John nodded, but an uneasy feeling settled over him. They were already in too deep. On the way back to the gas station, John drove more slowly. He was sure they were being watched. The sight of the black car made him flinch. When they reached the gas station, Sarah met them with a serious expression. He was here, she said immediately. A man in a dark coat. He didn't say who he was, but he wanted to know where you were. I didn't tell him anything, but he looked at me like he knew I was lying. John's hands clenched into fists. That's it. We need to find out more. Mike nodded grimly. Then let's see if we can pay Golden Paws Labs a surprise visit. John knew it was dangerous, but he also knew he couldn't stop until he had the truth. John Miller knew there was no turning back. Golden Paws Labs was the key to everything, and if they wanted answers, they'd have to face the danger. We're going, he said firmly, but we need to be careful. Sarah looked at him worriedly. John, if they're already following you, they might know you're coming. Then we'll surprise them first, Mike said grimly. They drove off into the darkness, the wind whistling over the road. The address Sarah had gotten from Janet's information led them to a remote industrial area. As they approached the facility, it became clear that the lab was far from abandoned. A faint light glowed through the windows, and a black car was parked in the driveway. Someone's in there, Mike whispered. John parked the truck at a safe distance. We'll take a look around. No noise, no attention. They crept through the shadows until they reached a side door. To their surprise, it wasn't locked. John opened it carefully, revealing a long hallway ahead. Neon lights flickered on the ceiling, and the smell of disinfectant hung heavy in the air. Doesn't look abandoned, Mike muttered. Sarah pointed to a room at the end of the hall. There. They moved forward cautiously. John opened the door a crack and peered inside. The room was an office, and at a desk sat a middle-aged man in a lab coat, flipping through files. I know that guy, Sarah whispered. Dr. Reynolds. He was one of the lead scientists here. John took a deep breath, then pushed the door open. Dr. Reynolds froze, his eyes widening. Who the hell are you? Someone who wants to know what Golden Paws Labs did to Lucy and the other dog, John said. The scientist looked between them. I can't. You don't understand who you're dealing with. Then explain it to us, John said, crossing his arms. Reynolds hesitated, then lowered his voice. Golden Paws was a front. We were genetically modifying dogs for military programs. Stronger, faster, more obedient. Lucy was part of a trial, but she failed the tests. Instead of euthanizing her, someone had her disappear. I don't know who, but they didn't want it to get out. John's hands clenched into fists. So you just threw her out? Reynolds nodded weakly. I regret it, but there are people far more dangerous than me. You need to leave before they realize you're here. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed from the hallway. Footsteps. Someone had discovered them. Damn it, Mike whispered. Sarah tugged at John's sleeve. We need to get out of here. But before they could move, the door burst open. A man in a black coat stepped in, the same one who had been following them. Mr. Miller, he said with a cold smile, I was hoping we wouldn't meet again. Tough luck for you, John growled. The man drew a gun. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. John glanced quickly at Reynolds, who had gone pale, then at Mike, who was slowly turning an iron rod in his hands. Maybe not, John said calmly, but I do know one thing. I won't let Lucy and her puppies be used for your dirty games. In a quick, coordinated move, Mike swung the iron rod, hitting the man's arm, while John lunged forward and knocked the gun from his hand. Sarah grabbed one of the files from the desk and bolted for the door. Let's go, she shouted. They stormed out as chaos erupted behind them. More men were in the building, but they managed to make it back to the truck. John jumped behind the wheel, hit the gas, and the tires screeched on the asphalt. "That was close," Sarah gasped. Mike laughed nervously. "I hope that guy broke his arm." John glanced in the rearview mirror. The black car wasn't following them anymore. They had broken free from Golden Paw's grip. Hours later, they sat in the gas station as Detective Roberts reviewed the files. After the confrontation, they had managed to inform the police about everything. "This is enough to bring them down," Roberts said with satisfaction. "They won't get away with this." John leaned back and took a sip of coffee. He felt the exhaustion in every bone of his body, but a sense of relief washed over him. Lucy lay at his feet, her puppies curled up peacefully. News of the Golden Paws raid spread quickly, and John's role in uncovering it became a quiet topic of admiration in the town. Lucy and her puppies found a proper home. Mike, Sarah, and John remained friends, and for the first time in a long time, John didn't feel alone. That evening, John sat on his porch, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. Lucy lay beside him, her puppies playing on the lawn. The town was quiet, and for the first time in years, John felt truly at home. He looked up at the clear sky, then down at Lucy and her pups. "Sometimes angels appear in the most unexpected places," he murmured. And this time, he truly believed it. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. Thanks to our valued viewers, we continue to improve every day. Please subscribe and give this video a thumbs up.